From the University of California's California-China Climate Institute, this is Climate Dialogues with Jerry Brown. In Episode 7, Institute Chair Jerry Brown speaks with Laurence Tubiana, renowned for her role in achieving the Paris Agreement in 2015, and now the CEO of European Climate Foundation. The pair discuss how to elevate global climate change on the world stage, carbon border adjustment mechanisms and carbon pricing, and climate diplomacy and international climate leadership in the lead up to COP26. Listen to their conversation now.
So let me say, I think the election of Biden has made a real impact in America. I think that's obvious. He has put forth solid plans in contrast to his predecessor, Mr. Trump, and even in contrast to Obama. Now, that was a few years ago, but we do enjoy a candor and a directness with the climate issue. The fires in California and Northwest America, that's having an impact too. And industries are stepping up. So in general, we're in a better position. Also, John Kerry, as the envoy, is very committed. He's been to China. He spoke to Minister Xi more than once, a couple of times, and he's already been to Russia to talk to Lavrov. He's been to India. So all that is putting America in a direct climate posture and taking initiatives never did before. But the Democrats only control the Senate by a thread, only a few seats in the House, and it's a very chancy environment here because the country is deeply divided. And many of the Republicans, not thousands, but tens of millions, believe Trump was elected and there was some kind of fraud that put in Biden. So they don't even accept, that group of Americans doesn't even accept the election. And secondly, there is a group that doesn't like the masks that were imposed for the virus. Many of the Republican voters, in particularly these conservative states, are not getting vaccinated, don't like the vaccination, and Fox News is using that as a way to build up fear and build up hostility to Biden and the Democrats. So carry that over into climate, and you can see that Biden is on the right track, but he's got a very divided America. So how much of the infrastructure he'll get, he's going to get something. But I think what is key is for the European leaders to push the United States to come here if they can, to make statements, to join together, and to link up with other countries. So I think there's great willingness on the part of Biden. There's real expertise and knowledge on the part of John Kerry. So that's all good. But to push forward, we're going to have to experience a lot more pressure, leadership, persuasion coming out of Europe. So let me ask you, is that at all conceivable? Is that possible? Can we get more of a boost from the Europeans?
Thank you for this introduction, because I do think we are at a crossroads. On one side, European leaders and the governments and the Commission and all what is, of course, the EU institution has been very, very keen to work on the European plan, which of course was proposed on the 14th of July, as you know. This plan is very ambitious. It resonates well with the US, with the Biden announcement and your president intention. For example, they have announced that they would have a ban on new sales of IC cars by 2035, with a 55 climate reduction of emission of climate target for cars in 2030 and 50 emission reduction for vans, 40% renewable energy in 2030, and of course, which is not enough, but and of course, and some elements on the coal phase out in a number of regions. There is, of course, a reform of the European trading system on carbon markets, and of course, with the idea to include some maritime and aviation. So there is of course, a broad attention paid to inside Europe. Now that Europe has made up its plan, and I think that's really an interesting moment to have the conversation between the European leaders and the US administration, including, which I see you have been a promoter, a champion of that, as well as a state level. Because I do think now the European are, in a way, proposing something for themselves and for the world that should be consistent with US policy. And I'm sure that it's a moment for US leaders to come and, of course, talk to Joe Biden, which already is the case, I understand, with the German Chancellor, but as well trying to develop maybe a joint diplomacy efforts, because in a way that maybe for the first time, Europe and United States are very, very aligned on what they would like to achieve. And so I'm sure that there is a capacity of Europe to engage much more now that the pathway is set. And for example, we could imagine that on this phase out of the IC engine, on the transformation of the automotive sector, on the capacity to integrate such huge amount of renewable energy, electricity in the grid, all these solutions about green hydrogen, etc., are really cooperation on the battery industry. I think there is an enormous prospect of joint US-EU effort, both in the domestic scene in each region and outside. And I would see a lot of advantage, and I sense, and I know what you think, I sense that the Biden administration is really interested by what can come from Europe, and is really well-intentioned. John Kerry visit in Europe were very, very successful, and I sense the need to support more the effort of John Kerry and Joe Biden on that. But it will be good to understand what could be the good way to help Joe Biden succeed in the domestic policy realm, as well as on the international diplomacy. And I think the collaboration around the G7 was good. But of course, the COP26 in Glasgow in November will be a very important moment as well to understand what we can do.
It seems to me that it takes, I'm not sure everything that Merkel had to say, but there's a lot of other talk. There's the talk about Russia and Russia's misdeeds. And there's even more talk about China misdeeds. And then there's the whole economy business. So climate doesn't get to the top where I believe it belongs. The world agenda, it's not high enough up there. It's higher than it's ever been, but we need continuous pushing. And sometimes Biden can do the push, and sometimes it could be the president of France or some of the other countries. But I think the G7, my feeling was it was nice, but there isn't the sense, or there isn't the rhetoric of urgency that can pave the way for greater action. And there's so many things you can worry about, that is Poland having the right judicial system. Okay, that's an important topic, but somehow climate should be the galvanizing issue that over and over again, every leader of these European countries with America, and I would say as well with China, they hear over and over again, this is how we all work together. It's a common interest. I'm still hearing a lot of talk about what's in our national interest when climate is in our national interest and it's in the planetary interest. It's in the world interest. So it's a common interest because it's a common vulnerability and common threat. I don't hear that language enough. And I'm wondering, would you agree with that? Am I overstating that? Or is there a much greater room for articulating the danger of climate disruption, and then the actions that ought to flow from that immediately? You know, what are we doing now? What are we going to say at Glasgow? Is there a grouping? Now, I give you an example. Before at Paris, we had President Xi and we had President Obama. They formed some kind of partnership. Well, we need something like that to take the next push here. If we're even going to have a successful COP. And, you know, at the same time, we have the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty coming up for its review here. And we have a lot of discussion there. So there's 5 or 10 big issues. And I am concerned that climate can be crowded off. And it can't be if we're going to be successful, because the transition is so difficult. Not difficult if we had the political will, but to get the political will galvanized takes more, I think, than we're doing today.
I think, Governor, I agree with you. There is not the sense of emergency we need. I totally agree. It's there. I think climate is now high on the political agenda, but the sense of energy or emergency, the energy that is invested in pursuing these aims is not there. And even the preparation of this Glasgow COP is very important. You feel that there is of course intention, everybody is expressing its goodwill to make it a success, but I understand why in a way there is this health crisis, the problem of the economic problems. In the developing countryside, there is a feeling that there is not enough solidarity, in particular on the COVID, on the vaccines, etc. But I agree with you, it should be an overriding problem that would in a way be put above every divergences, because we don't have any other solution. And it's not there. It's still in a way taken an hostage by the more traditional geopolitics. And we see that vis-a-vis China, we see that vis-a-vis even other countries. So I agree with you. I don't sense the feeling of emergency we should see. And yes, the Nord Stream pipeline is important, but it's much more important to discuss how we really rally around the emission reduction we need this year and next and the year to follow.
Yeah, and there's not, do you see a way we can, that with the European announcement, does that pave the way for more imaginative and energetic declarations on the part of the Europeans? I didn't even read what Merkel said when she came to the White House, but she didn't come and pound on the table and say, we must do more on climate for our children, our grandchildren. Did she say that? I don't recall.
I just don't see that. I think that was not a message out in the press. Of course, you're right. Now, I think because of the package is now on the table, I think there is room for European leaders to be, in a way, to speak with more energy. But it's not secured for the moment. I agree with you. I am concerned about, again, the fact that there are many issues on the table where we should have this one as the one, and still it's not the one.
So could the subnational people do it? Could the bankers do it? The insurance companies? Now we have Greta for a young child having much more impact than you would think she should be able to have. So if Greta can have impact, why can't a few European presidents maybe a few governors of America, but even very few governors are pushing climate today. So I'm just wondering who can we push to push the big people, you know, the presidents, because you mentioned the geopolitical standard talk. There's a lot of standard talk, but we know from history this talk is going to go on forever. You know, we just have one. If it isn't one thing, it's something else. Okay, so we got to get climate and climate higher up on the agenda. G20, the finance ministers met. I don't know that they talked about it too much, but now with this European plan, it seems like this should become something everybody else should respond to. And but of course, Europe hasn't done it yet. What's Hungary and Poland going to do? The Baltic countries, are they going to try to undermine this? So I think we need a movement here of some type that pushes people, first rhetorically and second programmatically.
I think my hope, even if I have the same concerns that you have, my hope is that on one side there is a increasing mobilization of the European citizen to really have strong climate policies. We have now more 75, in particular, of course, on the young generation, people that are asking for much tough policies on that. And 75% of the young generation think all over Europe, thinks that the government are not doing enough. So there is a constituency for action, backing action. Now that the package is there, that there is of course, a concern for, of course, the industries of Europe, whether they are in Poland or in Spain or in Italy, they want an agreement around that. There will not be unfair competition, and they have, of course, to have much more stricter standards. They will face that. So I think there is no remedy if the leaders of Europe don't fight for a global action. They will be faced with difficulties at home. That's why I feel that very strongly that the European leaders need success in climate change globally, because if not, they will be, of course, criticized at home in Europe because they would not delivering, the collective action that is needed. So that's why I think we have a window of opportunities there. Maybe Merkel is not on the right role because she's, of course, leaving. But the next government of Germany, Macron, if he's reelected next year, many more leaders, Draghi in Italy and the Prime Minister of Spain, they all share the same vision. So that's a moment for them to go out and say, this is what Europe will do, and we need other people to join, because if that's the only way to succeed. And I hope they will talk to the Chinese in this very clear way.
Yeah, well, let me give you an example. In the United States, there's LNG projects are being built and proposed to ship gas around the world. Well, hopefully, if they build them, they'll take them down in a few years, because we have to reduce our gas. So, and China is building so many coal plants, a huge number of coal plants, and America is still using all the oil that it's, and the world is using almost 100 million barrels a day. So I think some of these key indicators of climate wrong instead of climate right have to be called out. And I think America's been a little slower than Europe. But I think wherever it is, I think Europe has to say, we're doing this. America, you got to do more. Or what are you doing about I know. I think for Biden to really succeed, he's going to need more international assistance in the form of
That's a good point. That's a very good point and a good message I'm taking from you. Because, for example, if I take the example of gas, we had finally that finally European decision that, for example, the European Investment Bank would now no more support or lend for any gas-based project. So no gas project will enter in the portfolio, in the new portfolio of the European Investment Bank, which is, of course, as you know, a very big lender in Europe. So that's this type of very strong moves are important to understand, in particular on gas, because that's, of course, a new development that, of course, I understand US would like to see. And we have really to have the leaders of Europe just telling Joe Biden that that's not the way. That's not the way we can find a solution. But I understand it will be very difficult, of course.
Yeah,
But,
America doesn't want Russia to sell gas to Germany, but we want to sell LNG to anybody who will buy it. So I never hear anybody express that contradiction. You know, so I think we need more possibly polite, but more frank confrontation with the gap between where the world leaders are in the world and where the global warming is, which every year 40 billion tons of CO2 and maybe 15 or 20 billion tons of other greenhouse gases. That's a big number that's going up every, that's 2 or 3 billion a week of heat trapping gases of one kind or another. So I think the urgency is, we're certainly more at the point of recognition than ever before. And when I say we, I mean in the financial business community. Here we have our institute, which we're doing in connection with, we're doing this dialogue. But I'm considering doing teach-ins like we did in the Vietnam War, tapping into this youthful awareness of the absurdity of the fossil fuel excess, and tapping into that and getting more and more awareness of the crisis. So I think that's something that could also go on in Europe. I don't know if European universities are dealing with climate change as a political issue.
More and more, but it's still not dominating the agenda of the academia. And I have a question for you, Governor, that how you see China businesses beyond the policy of energy and what the government is doing on coal. Do you see an evolution in the businesses, in China vis-a-vis this global problem? Or do you see they have concern about what will happen if they don't decarbonize their activity? How you see the Chinese situation from the private sector point of view?
Well, I think China is very dominated, of course, by the Communist Party, and the Communist Party is very much directed by what President Xi says, and he has said 2060 carbon neutrality and 2030 or slightly before peaking. So that's what they keep saying. Now, what we're trying to do in our institute is find concrete ways that China can operationalize those objectives, how to get to peaking in the next couple of years, how to get to, what is the pathway, what are the benchmarks? And I think China's working on that, but it's not crystal clear how vigorous they are. I remember being with some Chinese delegates, Chinese officials that were accompanying Xi when he came to America. I asked them, what is more powerful, the automobile or the Communist Party? And they wouldn't answer me. And I think the automobile is more powerful in some ways, or at least the coal plants seem to be more powerful, in the sense that if the Communist Party is the ruling mechanism for China, then the ruling mechanism can say, we're not going to build coal, and then everyone will follow. But it doesn't quite work that way. So I think China has the potential of being a great leader in this, but it's not clear in my mind that they're there yet. And that's why I believe that almost anybody, Europe, Biden, if a certain grouping would push harder, then they would get more people. So we need more of a bandwagon effect that would derive from the various leaders. And sometimes the EU came out with some things. Now the US has to respond, and you engage China. But we have so many other things we're doing. I think one of our problems, quite frankly, is America feels America. Many think tank people, politicians like to judge the other people, and Russia and China and this one and that one. And we're very focused in America on the misdeeds of these other countries. So we lose focus on what is, I believe, an overriding threat, and that is the climate. And so we have to elevate that. And I don't think Europe has done enough. And I don't think, the world, we have, wherever we can pull it. Now, let me ask you something specific. This border adjustment, that could be well, is it even practical to have a border adjustment tax? So you really say, all right, you're building stuff over in China or in India or Korea, South Korea, and oh, you got a carbon content here. We're going to add that to the price of the product as soon as it hits France or England or Germany. Is that the proposal? Can we really do that?
The proposal is, of course, to start with, yeah, it is a philosophy, at least is as soon as the steel or the cement produced in EU will pay with a carbon tax, will pay the price of the pollution of carbon. The intention is for at least some sectors, not a big number of them, to, in a way, experiment the way that the same tax that is paid by the producers of Europe are paid by the one who want to sell steel or cement or fertilizer in Europe. That could be totally consistent with WTO rules if really companies are really paying that tax on the EU side. I do think that there are, of course, it may be complicated, certainly when, in a way, designing the system really for real, which will take time. Of course, certainly European institutions and the leaders have to consider what the impact is on other countries' trade. But it could be useful at least as a wake-up call, saying we cannot continue to produce steel or cement or fertilizer without paying attention to the carbon footprint. So in a way, I find this interesting as a way it creates attention on, look, now global markets has to take into account the carbon emission, that you cannot ignore that. So I don't know how it will go. I think in a way, I see that there will be certainly many tensions, but I see that on the other side, China has decided to extend their carbon market now, or to put it in place. So it could be an incentive for everybody to get more serious, which we need.
Right. Now, let me connect to that is the price on carbon. I believe that the EU, it's something like $55 today. In California, it's closer to, in our cap and trade, maybe $20, $23, maybe higher. But we also have a low carbon fuel standard where the money doesn't get paid to government, but it gets paid to other industries that are generating credits because they like solar or biodiesel, things like that. That price of carbon is over $120. So that's a powerful signal. The oil companies tried to get rid of it, but in California, we have it. In Oregon, we're the only two states. Now, the Chinese price of carbon, I think, is very low. And my question is, when we take the price, if the price rises to what it needs to be to discourage fossil fuel use, 55, 65, 75, 100, then is that politically viable? And or you're going to have a real political revolt. In France, the yellow shirt people didn't like the gas tax, and a carbon price can be like a gas tax. So do you have any thoughts on how we governments put in a pricing of carbon, but also keep lifting it to a higher level.
So on one side, the carbon price that is paid now then will certainly raise, is paid by the companies, and a very small portion of it is transmitted to the consumers, at least for the moment. For example, the carbon price of 50 or more euros a ton on steel translating to very few, in a way, even few dollars, even less in a car when you buy your car. So there are sectors where the transmission of the carbon price to the consumer is really relatively limited, that doesn't have a real social impact. Of course, on the fuel directly, for example, and that was the case for the yellow vest in France. The problem is that people cannot necessarily switch from having a highly polluting car to a cleaner one. And that's why, and that the perspective of the new solidarity fund that has been decided together with this extension of the carbon price in the economy in Europe, is to try to, in a way, compensate people who cannot switch, for example, to an electric car easily because they are still too expensive for them. So to have to compensate them for the tax they are paying. So the economic signal exists, but of course it doesn't have a regressive effect on the, in a way, the more modest household. This is not easy to do, but I think it's a condition for the policy to be put in place.
Do you see any, what sources of political enthusiasm do you see? Is there in Europe that we might emulate or be inspired by here in the United States?
Certainly the younger generation, but I think you have the same in US. So the young generation in your country is quite active on climate. It's the same in Europe. I see there is an economic sector that sees their future in that direction too. And that's very good to hear them, that they can speak up, to see that electrification of transport or renewable energy is a source of jobs and opportunities. I do think that now people are more and more concerned about pollution and the climate impacts. And I'm sure, of course, unfortunately, California is in this case. But I see, for example, the dramatic events that are happening now in Germany are pushing really the climate agenda for the election very, very fast. So I do think that the combination of the young generation, the progressive industries who see the future in the zero carbon world, and the climate impacts are changing the mindset in Europe. And I see the combination could maybe a little bit similar, but bet on the young generation and the progressive business. It seems to me a very important constituency that can be mobilized.
Well, we're going to have to do quite a bit more. And leading up to the Glasgow meeting, we're going to need some more commitments out of somebody, countries, or corporations, or whatever. Well, look, we've pretty well exhausted our time here, but it's been wonderful to hear from you, to see you, and know you're fighting the good fight. And just know that I too am fully engaged, and I'm looking for ways all the time to up the temperature, up the awareness level. And I think Glasgow is a good benchmark. Let's get as far as we can in terms of commitments by the time people arrive there.
Thank you very much, Governor. That this conversation is very energizing, which what we need.
Okay, good. Thank you very much. Enjoyed it very much.
Bye-bye, Governor. Bye.
Bye.